I was reading the comments from our last session, and one of you wrote something that completely stopped me in my tracks. You said, "Never have I heard someone articulate what's been occupying my mind for so long, so accurately. Everything I thought I knew about life is false." But I wouldn't go back. I want to sit with that sentence for a minute. Everything I thought I knew about life is false. When you finally hit that specific psychological threshold, it feels like you are experiencing a cognitive earthquake. The entire foundation of your reality violently shifts. You spend your whole life being indoctrinated by a secular, liberal, capitalist operating system. They teach you their version of history, their version of success, their version of morality, and you consume it because you don't know any better. You think the international community has rules. You think the media exists to inform you. You think your corporate job is the pinnacle of human achievement. And then you unplug. You look at the raw, unfiltered geopolitical board. You look at the source code of the Quran, and the illusion completely disintegrates. The shock of realizing that the institutions you trusted are actively managing your enslavement is devastating. It is a grieving process. You are literally mourning the death of your old worldview. But notice the second half of that comment. But I wouldn't go back. That is the absolute superpower of the believer. Once you taste the cold, sharp, terrifying air of absolute reality, you can never return to the warm, suffocating comfort of the matrix. You would rather endure the agony of the truth than live another second inside the simulation. If you look at the geopolitical timeline right now, in 2026, you are watching the physical manifestation of this global illusion collapsing in real time. Look at the feed. You have superpowers engaging in direct kinetic warfare. You have the Strait of Hormuz being choked off, triggering massive global economic shockwaves. You have entire European nations quietly preparing for the total collapse of their energy sectors. From a secular perspective, it looks like the world is simply spiraling into chaotic madness. But from an eschatological perspective, we are watching the highly coordinated, frantic panic of a dying empire. The Anglo-American globalist hegemony has maintained absolute control over the planet for the last century through two primary mechanisms: the illusion of unbeatable military supremacy and the illusion of absolute moral high ground. They sold the world on human rights and international law. But those illusions have been entirely, irrevocably shattered over the last few years. The whole planet is watching the most advanced militaries on earth bomb tents, slaughter civilians, and torture hostages, all while the secular politicians stand at their podiums and justify it in the name of democracy. The mask has been ripped off. The global South, the East, and most importantly, the Ummah, are looking at the overlords and realizing that the emperor has absolutely no clothes. There is no international law. There is no rules-based order. There is only raw, unadulterated power and the desperate, violent attempt of a falling empire to maintain its grip on the dunya. Because they have lost the moral illusion, the overlords are now forced to rely entirely on brute force and psychological manipulation. But even their psychological operations are failing. Look at the media landscape right now. The legacy media apparatus is actively bleeding to death. For decades, a handful of corporate networks controlled the exact parameters of human thought. They decided who the heroes were and who the terrorists were. But the decentralized nature of digital information has completely bypassed their gatekeepers. People are seeing raw, unedited footage of the absolute barbarism of the matrix from the ground. They are seeing the resilience, the ilaqeen, and the uncompromising faith of the believers under the rubble, and it is causing a massive glitch in the global narrative. The technocrats are terrified. They are realizing that you cannot bomb an ideology out of existence, and you cannot censor a truth that has already colonized the hearts of millions of people. So what do? They panic. They attempt to ban platforms. They utilize artificial intelligence to generate fake narratives, and they aggressively suppress any algorithm that exposes their hypocrisy. The massive uptick in censorship you are seeing is not a sign of their strength. It is the ultimate proof of their absolute foundational fragility. A system that holds the truth does not need to arrest people for posting videos online. A system built on the truth does not need to deploy thousands of AI bots to manipulate public opinion. They are doing this because the dam has broken, the water is flooding in, and they do not have enough fingers to plug the holes. This global polarization is not an accident. It is the precise prophesied sorting of humanity. Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam warned us about this exact era. He described the period of extreme fitan as a time that will continuously divide the people until they are separated into two distinct camps. He called it fastat iman la nifaq fi wa fastat nifaq la iman fi. A camp of faith that contains absolutely no hypocrisy, and a camp of hypocrisy that contains absolutely no faith. Look at the absolute brilliance of that prophecy. We are living in the death of the gray area. For decades, people tried to straddle the fence. They tried to be culturally Muslim while fully adopting the secular liberal ideology of the overlords. They tried to be moderates, but the sheer brutality of the current geopolitical conflict has made that completely impossible. You can no longer hold hands with the system of the Dajjal while claiming to worship Allah. The heat of the global furnace is forcing every single human being on this planet to pick a side. You either align yourself with the arrogant, materialist, hyper-violent empires of the earth, or you align yourself with the absolute truth of the heavens. There is no middle ground left. The people you see defending the indefensible, the politicians justifying genocide, the influencers remaining silent to protect their brand deals, they are actively sorting themselves into the camp of hypocrisy. And the people who are losing their jobs, being smeared in the media and standing firm on the truth despite the massive earthly consequences, they are sorting themselves into the camp of pure faith. When you understand this concept of the two camps, the entire geopolitical board suddenly makes terrifying sense. The alliances we are seeing today are not based on traditional political science, they are based on spiritual alignment. Look at the 1v80 dynamic we discussed before. You see communist regimes, ultra-nationalist factions, and liberal democracies quietly collaborating, sharing intelligence, and attempting to suppress the awakening of the Ummah. On paper, they despise each other, but in the unseen reality, they are completely united in their absolute rejection of the sovereignty of Allah. They belong to the same camp. They are the camp of hypocrisy and kufr. Their internal squabbles are just turf wars inside the exact same prison. But the moment the camp of pure Iman attempts to establish itself, the moment a group of believers refuses to bow to the international banking cartel, refuses to accept the artificial borders drawn by colonial powers, and refuses to surrender their theology to secular humanism, the overlords drop their internal beefs and unite to crush the anomaly. They do this because they recognize that the true believers are playing a completely different meta. The overlords are fighting to control the simulation, but the believers are fighting to tear the simulation down entirely. You have to stop viewing the enemies of the Ummah as fragmented, separate political entities. They are a monolithic spiritual block. Kal kavr malla wahda. Disbelief is one nation. And once you see them as a single entity operating against the truth, you stop expecting any of their institutions to save you. Because they are losing control of the narrative, the secular technocrats are accelerating their timeline. This is why you are seeing this massive, frantic push toward artificial intelligence, digital currencies, and absolute technological surveillance right now in 2026. The system knows that human consciousness is waking up. They know that people are rejecting the legacy media and questioning the financial slavery of al-Rabah. So they are desperately trying to build a digital cage that is so perfectly optimized that rebellion becomes mathematically impossible. When you see tech billionaires bragging about AI automating the workforce and governments pushing for digital IDs tied to your bank account, you must understand that this is not about progress or convenience. It is about establishing a hardline, inescapable infrastructure of coercion. They want to create a world where if you belong to the camp of pure faith, if you refuse to comply with their degenerate social mandates or their illegal wars, you are instantly, algorithmically exiled from society. You won't be able to buy food, start a business, or travel. They are trying to replace the physical chains of the past with invisible digital chains. The architecture of the Jiao is moving from the planning phase into the deployment phase. This is the exact moment where your financial and technological independence transitions from being a good idea to being a matter of absolute existential survival. If you are entirely dependent on their grid, you will be forced to kneel when they flip the switch. This realization is what causes the profound pain mentioned in that comment, the pain of waking up. When you realize the depth of the deception, when you realize that the food is poisoned, the money is fake, the media is a weapon, and the politicians are puppets, it induces a state of deep, paralyzing grief. You grieve the loss of the comfortable illusion. Ignorance was bliss. It was so much easier when you thought the world was just a bit flawed, but generally heading in the right direction. It was easier when you thought you could just get a good job, buy a nice house, and live a quiet, undisturbed life. Waking up to the hardcore survival reality of the dunya hurts because it places a massive, terrifying burden of responsibility directly onto your shoulders. You can no longer play the role of the oblivious NPC. You are now accountable for what you know. You are accountable to protect your mind, your family, and your wealth from the system. You are accountable to speak the truth when everyone else is silent. The matrix relies on your fatigue. They want the sheer scale of the corruption to make you feel so small, so insignificant, and so exhausted that you simply give up and plug back into the feed. You have to fight that fatigue with every ounce of your spiritual energy The pain of waking up is the pain of your soul finally breaking out of the mold the overlords built for you. It is the growing pains of true yaqeen. Embrace it. Do not run from it. We have to dismantle the specific psychological weapon the system uses to keep you in a state of despair. The illusion of their invincibility. The Matrix bombards you with images of their absolute kinetic power. They show you their aircraft carriers, their hypersonic missiles, their massive global summits, and their trillion-dollar corporations. They want you to internalize a sense of complete futility. They want you to look at the bleeding ummah and think, we have nothing, we are defeated. They are gods on earth. This is the exact psychological operation that Pharaoh ran on the children of Israel. He paraded his massive armies, his wealth, and his architectural dominance to convince them that resistance was mathematically impossible. But the Quran teaches us to look past the physical physics of the board. All of their technology, all of their wealth, and all of their weapons are fundamentally restricted by the boundaries of the dunya. They cannot extend their power 1 millimeter beyond what the creator of the universe allows. When you read the stories of the prophets, the lesson is always the same. Material supremacy is not an indicator of ultimate victory. It is usually the precursor to divine destruction. The more arrogant the empire becomes, the closer it is to the cliff. The overlords are terrifying to a secular mind because the secular mind only believes in what it can see. But the believer operates in a'lam al-ghib. We understand that the true balance of power is entirely unseen. The angels do not register on their satellite radars. Look at the absolute psychological fragility of the oppressor. The secular elite spend their entire lives accumulating power, wealth, and status, and yet they live in a state of constant suffocating paranoia. They are terrified of the masses. They are terrified of losing their wealth. They are absolutely paralyzed by the fear of death. They build underground bunkers to survive apocalyptic events, utterly blind to the fact that they cannot build a bunker to protect themselves from the angel of death. Their entire existence is a frantic, anxiety-ridden attempt to hold on to a fistful of sand as it slips through their fingers. Now compare that to the psychological state of the believer in the rubble. You see footage of Muslims who have lost their entire families, their homes, and everything they own in this world. And what are they saying? They are looking at the sky, raising their hands, and saying, Hasbanallah wa ni'am al-wakil. Sufficient for us is Allah, and He is the best disposer of affairs. That level of absolute unshakable peace in the face of complete material annihilation completely breaks the secular mind. It is a superpower that the technocrats cannot hack, replicate, or destroy. They look at the believer and realize that their ultimate weapon, the destruction of the material world, has absolutely no leverage over a heart that is anchored to the akhirah. The overlords are fighting a war against a people who have already accepted the absolute worst case scenario of the dunya as a VIP ticket to Jannah. They have already lost the psychological war. This is why cultivating the yaqeen is the single most important survival tactic in the 21st century. Your belief cannot just be a cultural inheritance. It cannot just be something you do out of habit. It must be a weaponized intellectual and spiritual certainty. You have to know the source code inside and out. The system is going to throw incredibly sophisticated doubts at you. They will use pseudoscience, twisted philosophy, and emotional manipulation to try and separate you from the Quran and the Sunnah. If your foundation is weak, you will be swept away by the current. You have to aggressive study the seerah, not just as a historical bedtime story, but as the ultimate geopolitical manual for surviving hostile environments. You have to study the names and attributes of Allah, so that when the system attempts to play God, you immediately recognize the pathetic frailty of their imitation. When you have true al-yaqeen, you stop reacting to the news cycle with panic. When the overlords announce a new surveillance technology or a new global war, you don't fall into despair. You simply nod, because the Prophet ﷺ already told you this was the exact trajectory of the end times. The chaos does not weaken your faith. The chaos actively validates your faith. You watch the matrix collapse exactly as prophesied, and your heart becomes completely tranquil. You shift from being a panicked victim of the simulation to being a calm, prepared observer of the divine decree. Let's talk about the economic collapse that is happening in the background of these wars. The global fiat currency system is experiencing a mathematical death spiral. The massive inflation, the astronomical national debts, the de-dollarization. This is the end stage of a global economy built entirely on Aruba. You cannot build a civilization on usury and expect it to survive. It is a violation of the fundamental physics of reality. Allah explicitly states that He destroys riba and gives increase to charities. The overlords have built a towering, glittering financial empire on a foundation of quicksand, and the sand is finally giving way. The middle class is being systematically eradicated. You are being forced to work 80 hours a week just to afford basic groceries, while the elite siphon the remaining wealth into their isolated asset portfolios. The user in the comments said, "Everything I thought I knew about life is false." This applies directly to your career and your financial aspirations. The corporate ladder they told you to climb is attached to a burning building. You are sacrificing your youth, your physical health, and your spiritual peace to achieve a retirement in a system that mathematically will not exist by the time you get there. You have to drastically pivot your economic strategy. You have to untether your self-worth from your job title. Stop trying to accumulate their dying currency and start focusing on hard skills, tangible assets, and the absolute minimization of debt. You have to starve the beast by refusing to play their consumerist game. When you accept the death of the old operating system, a massive amount of mental bandwidth is freed up. All of the energy you used to spend worrying about keeping up with the Joneses, agonizing over office politics, and trying to curate a perfect aesthetic for social media, all of that energy returns to you. You suddenly realize how much of your life was completely wasted on the performance of the dunya. And what do you do with that reclaimed energy? You redirect it entirely toward the preparation for the al-akhirah. You start treating your daily prayers not as an annoying chore you have to squeeze in between meetings, but as the absolute most critical, high-level strategic briefings of your day. You stop viewing the rules of Islam as restrictions, and you start viewing them as the exact cheat codes required to navigate the minefield of the matrix safely. You begin to understand that the entire purpose of the Dajjalic system is to keep you looking horizontally, at your peers, at the media, at your bank account. The system desperately wants to prevent you from looking vertically, because the moment you look up, the moment you bypass the artificial ceiling they built and connect directly with the creator of the heavens, their entire control grid shatters. The true rebellion in the modern world is not a political protest. The true rebellion is 2 raka'at in the dead of night, shedding tears of absolute sincerity, completely disconnected from the noise of the simulation. We have to be acutely aware of how the system is currently weaponizing fear. As their control slips, fear is the only tool they have left. They broadcast the threat of World War III, they blast images of pandemic viruses, they threaten catastrophic climate collapse, and they constantly push the narrative of artificial intelligence becoming an uncontrollable god. They want you living in a constant low-grade state of terror. A fearful mind is a compliant mind. When people are terrified, they willingly surrender their rights, their privacy, and their moral compass in exchange for the illusion of safety. The overlords offer themselves as the saviors to the exact crises they themselves engineered. It is the Hegelian dialectic perfected. To survive this, you have to actively weaponize tawakkul against their fear programming. When they threaten you with poverty, you remember that Allah is Ar-Razaq, the provider. When they threatened you with war and annihilation, you remember that Allah is Al-Hafid, the protector. You have to ruthlessly protect the gates of your mind. Do not let their fear-mongering algorithm dictate your internal emotional state. You observe the threats, you tie your camel, you make the logical preparations necessary for your family, but you absolutely refuse to internalize their panic. You must operate with a cold, calculated, spiritual detachment. The system expects you to tremble. You must respond with the unbreakable, terrifying calm of a believer who already knows exactly how the story ends. There is a massive historical amnesia that has plagued the Ummah for the last century, but it is finally breaking. The sleeping giant is remembering who it is. For decades, we were conditioned to view ourselves as a weak, defeated, colonized demographic. We were taught to view our history through the lens of our modern humiliation. We forgot that we are not just another political faction on the global board. We are the final definitive instrument of divine justice on earth. We are the ummah of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We hold the absolute final uncorrupted revelation of the Creator. We are the carriers of the source code. The overlords spent billions of dollars to make us forget our own identity, to replace our Islamic pride with secular nationalism, tribalism, and petty cultural divides. But the sheer violence of the 1v80 coalition is burning those false identities away. An Arab, an Asian, a European, an African, when they look at the geopolitical reality today, they're realizing that the matrix does not care about your passport. The matrix only cares that you bow to the dunya, and if you refuse, you are an enemy of the state. This realization is violently unifying the believers across the globe. The artificial borders drawn by colonial powers in the sand are dissolving in the minds of the youth. The ummah is waking up to the fact that we are a single, indivisible spiritual body. And the moment that realization moves from the digital realm into physical, economic, and geopolitical coordination, the reign of the overlords is mathematically finished. So you have read the comment, you have felt the shock, you have admitted to yourself that everything you thought you knew about life under the secular system is false. You have unplugged. The question is, what exactly do you do now? You cannot just sit in a state of existential awe. You cannot just consume these master classes and feel a temporary buzz of intellectual superiority. Waking up is not the destination. Waking up is just the absolute bare minimum requirement to enter the battlefield. You are now standing outside the matrix, and it is freezing, it is isolating, and it is incredibly dangerous. You must transition immediately from realization to execution. You have to start building the physical architecture of your resistance. You have to purify your income. You have to cleanse your heart of the diseases of arrogance, envy, and the love of being seen. You must find the other strangers in your community and forge unbreakable physical bonds with them. You have to prepare your family for the immense friction that is coming as the eschatological timeline accelerates. You are no longer an NPC. You are a conscious, active player in the most critical, high-stakes era of the dunya hardcore survival world. The sorting process of the two camps is happening right now, today, in the micro decisions you make every single hour. Choose your side carefully. Do not let the comfort of the illusion pull you back to sleep. We have to talk about the absolute arrogance of the modern technocratic elite. They genuinely believe they have hacked the human condition. They look at their artificial intelligence, their advanced algorithms, their biometric surveillance, and their ability to manipulate the global financial markets. And they think they have achieved godhood. They literally talk about transcending biology, living forever, and managing the human herd as if we are livestock. But look at the profound, terrifying irony of their arrogance. Allah tells us in the Quran, يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرًا مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ هُمْ غَافِلُونَ. They know what is apparent of the worldly life, but they of the hereafter are unaware. This is the exact clinical diagnosis of the Silicon Valley billionaires and the central bankers. They have mastered the microscopic mechanics of the simulation. They know how to extract lithium, they know how to code neural networks, they know how to weaponize interest rates. They have absolute mastery over the zahir, the apparent. But they are completely, utterly blind to the fundamental architecture of reality. They do not understand the ruh, soul. They do not understand baraka. They do not understand that the entire physical universe they are trying to conquer is just a thin, fragile layer of existence that will be rolled up like a scroll on the day of judgment. Their entire empire is built on the premise that the screen will never turn off. And because they are blind to the akhirah, their entire game theory is fundamentally flawed. They are calculating their geopolitical moves using incomplete data. They are playing chess against the creator of the board, and they don't even realize they are already in checkmate. The arrogance of the overlords is not a sign of their power, it is the absolute proof of their impending divine humiliation. This blindness is exactly why they cannot comprehend the behavior of the victorious party. When the overlords drop bombs on a population, destroy their infrastructure, and cut off their food and water, the secular mathematical models predict that the population will instantly surrender. The algorithms predict that the human desire to survive will override any ideological commitment. And for a secular population, that math is 100% correct. But when they apply that same math to a population anchored in a tawheed, the model completely breaks. The algorithms cannot process a mother holding the lifeless body of her child, looking up at the sky and saying, Alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah. The AI cannot compute a starving man refusing to sell his religion for a truckload of egg. The technocrats watch this and they are genuinely terrified because they are encountering a variable they cannot control, cannot bomb into submission. They are encountering il-yaqeen. The entire global system is designed to break the human will by leveraging the fear of loss. But how do you leverage the fear of loss against a people who already believe that everything they own, including their own bodies, belongs entirely to Allah? You can't, the moment the believer says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'una, indeed we belong to Allah and indeed to Him we will return, the matrix completely loses its grip. The 1v80 coalition is fighting a war using physical weapons against a spiritual fortress they cannot even see. They are swinging swords at the wind. And this is why, despite their overwhelming material superiority, they are losing the psychological war on a global scale. And this psychological defeat is causing the matrix to glitch violently. We are watching the real-time collapse of the Western moral narrative. For a century, the West justified its global hegemony by claiming to be the enlightened, civilized, morally superior force on earth. They lectured the Ummah on human rights, democracy, and the rules of war. They used this narrative to justify invading our countries, toppling our governments, and extracting our resources. But the sheer unfiltered brutality of the current conflict has completely shattered that illusion. The entire planet is watching the architects of the rules-based international order actively fund arm, and politically shield the most barbaric, televised genocide in modern history. The hypocrisy is no longer something you have to read between the lines to see. It is being broadcast in 4K resolution directly onto the timelines of billions of people. The youth of the West are waking up to the fact that their governments are run by bloodthirsty hypocrites. And more importantly, the youth of the Ummah are waking up to the fact that trying to assimilate into this system is a spiritual death sentence. We are done apologizing for our religion to people who have the blood of millions on their hands. We are done trying to prove our humanity to a system that views us as acceptable collateral damage. The collapse of the Western moral high ground is the greatest eschatological shift of our lifetime. The spell is broken. The world sees the overlords for exactly what they are, tyrants operating under the banner of a Dajjal. And this realization is the exact catalyst required for the global awakening of the Muslims. As the illusion collapses, the system is going to become exponentially more authoritarian. The era of the velvet glove is over. The iron fist is being revealed. We are moving rapidly into a phase where simply speaking the truth will be criminalized. You are already seeing it. The overlords are passing laws to equate criticism of their geopolitical projects with hate speech. They are threatening to ban entire social media platforms if they cannot control the algorithm's output. They are weaponizing the banking system to deplatform dissident voices. This is the exact environment that Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam warned us about when he said that holding on to your religion would be like holding on to a burning hot coal. The heat is intensifying. If you want to remain part of Ta'ifa al-Mansura, you have to mentally prepare yourself for the friction. You have to accept that your career trajectory might be severely limited because you refuse to compromise your values. You have to accept that you might be socially ostracized. You have to stop seeking a comfortable, friction-free existence in a world that is actively at war with your creator. Comfort is the anesthetic of the matrix. If you are entirely comfortable in the dunya right now, if your life is perfectly aligned with the corporate, secular, liberal status quo, you need to seriously evaluate the state of your heart. The true believer is deeply, fundamentally maladjusted to a profoundly sick society. The friction you feel is the proof that your soul is still alive. Embrace the heat of the coal. It is the only thing keeping you from freezing to death in the spiritual winter of the 21st century. We have to completely rebuild our understanding of success and failure. The matrix has conditioned you to evaluate your life using their metrics: your net worth, your follower count, your job title, your physical comfort. If you use those metrics, the One V80 coalition looks invincible, and the believers look completely defeated. But those metrics are a localized illusion. They only exist within the boundaries of the simulation. You must elevate your perspective to the timeline of eternity. From the perspective of the Al-Akhirah, the billionaire technocrat who dies without a tawheed is the ultimate catastrophic failure. He spent his entire brief existence accumulating digits on a screen, only to arrive at the day of judgment completely bankrupt, facing the eternal wrath of the Creator. And the believer who dies under the rubble, hungry, impoverished, and ridiculed by the global media, but with a heart full of al-yaqeen, is the ultimate cosmic victor. He bypassed the trials of the grave, achieved the shahada, and graduated instantly to the highest ranks of Jannah. The overlords think they are punishing the believers by destroying their physical lives, but they are actually just expediting their entry into paradise. When you truly internalize this, the entire geopolitical board flips upside down. You stop pitying the martyrs and you start pitying the oppressors. You realize that the tyrants are just digging their own eternal graves with every bomb they drop. The victory of the believer is mathematically guaranteed, regardless of the material outcome on earth. The only variable is whether you have the spiritual spine to stay on the path until the timer runs out. This requires a radical shift in how we educate the next generation. The current secular education system is designed to produce obedient, anxious, materialistic workers. It is designed to sever the child's connection to the unseen world and replace it with a hyper-rational, atheistic worldview. They teach our children that human beings are just highly evolved apes, that the universe is a random accident, and that morality is entirely subjective. If you send your child into that system for 8 hours a day, and you only teach them about Islam for an hour on the weekend, you are mathematically going to lose their soul to the matrix. We have to violently disrupt this pipeline. Raising a child upon strict tawheed today is an act of hardcore geopolitical resistance. You must teach your children that they are not citizens of the secular world order. They are ambassadors of the heavens. You must teach them the seerah, not as a collection of bedtime stories, but as the ultimate manual for surviving hostile environments and tearing down corrupt empires. You must teach them to view the media, the culture, and the economy with a cold, critical, eschatological lens. We are not raising children to assimilate into the dying corporate matrix. We are raising the generation that will be tasked with navigating the absolute peak of the Dajjal system. They need spiritual armor that is exponentially thicker than the armor we wear today. If we fail to build parallel educational structures, we are handing the future of the ummah directly over to the architects of the deception. We must also fundamentally reject the pacifying drug of slacktivism. The matrix is incredibly sophisticated. It knows that human beings have a biological urge to fight injustice. So it built a digital release valve for that urge. It gives you social media. It allows you to post infographics, share horrific videos, and argue with anonymous trolls for hours on end. And because you get a micro hit of dopamine from the likes and retweets, your brain tricks you into believing that you have actually accomplished something meaningful. You feel like a revolutionary because you typed a paragraph on a platform owned by a billionaire technocrat. This is a massive, paralyzing illusion. The overlords do not care if you hate them online, as long as you continue to consume their products, pay their taxes, and rely entirely on their infrastructure for your survival. Tweeting at secular politicians who are actively funded by the military-industrial complex is not resistance. It is digital theater. You are begging Pharaoh to save you from Pharaoh. You have to break out of the digital containment zone. Real resistance is terrifyingly analog. It is building physical wealth that is free from ul-ruba. It is building physical strength. It is building localized physical communities of believers who can support each other when the system attempts to crush them. You have to transition from being a passive, outraged consumer of the news cycle to an active, disciplined architect of the Ummah's future. Stop letting the algorithms farm your righteous anger for ad revenue. Log off, look around you, and start building the physical infrastructure of the resistance. This physical infrastructure absolutely must include a return to the concept of al-Khwa, true, profound Islamic brotherhood and sisterhood. The modern world has completely atomized us. We live in massive cities, surrounded by millions of people, yet we are more isolated than any generation in history. We treat relationships as disposable transactions. We cancel each other over microscopic theological disagreements. We demand absolute, flawless perfection from human beings, and when they make a mistake, we digitally execute them. This hyper-individualism is exactly what the system wants. The wolf only eats the stray sheep. When you are isolated, Shaitan has unlimited access to your psychology. He amplifies your doubts, magnifies your sins, and drowns you in despair. You cannot survive the 1v80 coalition alone in your bedroom. You have to force yourself to rebuild physical tribal loyalty. You must go to the masjid. You must look the other men in the eye, forgive their flaws, and lock shields with them. The early Muslims survived the absolute terror of Mecca, not because they were individually invincible, but because they operated as a single, impenetrable, unified body. When one part ached, the whole body felt the fever. We have to recreate that exact dynamic right now. When the secular economy squeezes one of us, the community must absorb the blow. When the psychological warfare threatens to break a brother's mind, the Jama'ah must be there to pull him out of the abyss. The matrix wants you alone and paranoid. The ultimate rebellion is to build a physical unified tribe right under their noses. We have to prepare for the inevitable deployment of the ultimate deception. The Prophet ﷺ warned us that the Dajjal will come with abilities that completely shatter the secular understanding of physics. He will command the sky to rain, and it will rain. He will command the earth to bring forth vegetation, and it will grow. He will bring the dead back to life as an illusion. The Matrix is currently building the technological infrastructure to simulate these exact abilities on a global scale. Look at the advancements in artificial intelligence, deep fakes, weather modification, and genetic engineering. The technocrats are attempting to hack the source code of reality itself. When the system finally unveils its full capability, the secular mind will instantly submit. People who have no foundation in the unseen world, people whose entire reality is based on material science, will look at these supernatural feats and they will bow down and worship the system. They will view the architect of the deception as a literal God. The only thing that will protect you in that exact moment is absolute uncompromising at-Tawheed. You must know the names and attributes of Allah so deeply that when a false entity attempts to mimic divine power, your heart instantly recognizes the pathetic, fragile nature of the imitation. You must know that the true creator does not have a defective eye, and the true creator is not confined to the physical dimensions of the dunya. The ultimate test is approaching, and the global population is being meticulously primed to fail it. You must ensure that your spiritual operating system is completely immunized against the illusion. The user who wrote that comment said, if all the Muslims woke up, the meta would change the dunya hardcore survival world forever. I want you to visualize the absolute staggering reality of that statement. Imagine 2 billion human beings suddenly realizing that the fiat currency system is a scam designed to siphon their wealth and collectively refusing to participate in the banking cartel. The global financial architecture would collapse in 48 hours. Imagine 2 billion people realizing that the mainstream media is a psychological operation and collectively turning off the screens and rejecting the propaganda. The entire mechanism of societal control would evaporate. Imagine 2 billion people suddenly curing themselves of al-Wuhan, overcoming their fear of death, and prioritizing the akhirah over their corporate careers. The military-industrial complex would become completely obsolete. The overlords are ruling over a house of cards. They project this aura of terrifying absolute omnipotence, but their power relies entirely on our continued passive, terrified consent. The 1v80 coalition only works as long as the one remains fragmented, distracted, and infected with the love of the world. The victorious party is simply the group that has decided to stop participating in the illusion. They have opted out of the spider's web, and they're operating on the absolute bedrock of divine reality. The moment the sleeping giant of the ummah wakes up and shifts its paradigm from survival to absolute submission to the Creator, the reign of the secular overlords is mathematically finished. To catalyze this awakening, we have to completely stop apologizing for the truth. The era of the sanitized, politically correct, watered down Islam is officially dead. It was a massive failure. For decades, we tried to prove to the secular West that we are just like them, that we share their liberal values, that we are peaceful, compliant subjects who just happen to pray in a different building. We tried to play their meta, and what did it achieve? Absolute catastrophic humiliation. It emboldened the overlords to slaughter the ummah with impunity because they knew we had completely lost our spiritual spine. You do not negotiate with a system that is actively engineering your spiritual and physical destruction. The truth is not meant to peacefully coexist with falsehood. The truth is meant to utterly eradicate it. جاء الحق وزهق الباطل. جاء إن الباطل كان زهوقا. Truth has come and falsehood has departed. Indeed is falsehood by nature ever bound to depart. You must start speaking with the absolute, uncompromising authority of a person who holds the final revelation of the Creator of the universe. You do not need to adapt the Quran to fit the delicate sensibilities of the 21st century. The 21st century must be judged, broken, and realigned to fit the Quran. Stop apologizing for the source code. Stop trying to make the absolute truth palatable to NPCs who despise you. The top-ranked overlords know the power of the pure message. That is exactly why they fear it. Embody the unshakable frequency of the victorious party. As the eschatological timeline accelerates, you have to fiercely protect your ultimate objective, the preservation of your qalb. The system will throw absolutely everything it has at you to corrupt your heart. They will use the algorithms to feed you endless streams of despair, lust, and manufactured outrage. They will use the economy to crush you with anxiety and force you into compromise. They will use the geopolitical theater to make you feel completely mathematically hopeless. But you must constantly remind yourself that the condition of your heart is the only metric that matters on the day of judgment. يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. The day when neither wealth nor children will be of any benefit, except for he who comes to Allah with a sound heart. The overlords can steal your wealth. They can bomb your physical house. They can imprison your biological body. But they cannot force you to commit shirk. They cannot force you to stop remembering Allah in the dark. They cannot touch your qalb taslim unless you voluntarily hand them the keys out of fear or greed. The ultimate victory in this hardcore survival world is not surviving until you are 80 years old in a comfortable corporate job, completely assimilated into the matrix. The ultimate victory is crossing the finish line, battered, bruised, and completely exhausted by the trials of the dunya, but with a heart that is entirely pure, fiercely uncompromising, and completely submitted to the dev. Do not let them corrupt your source code. Do not trade your eternal rank for a few days of temporary miserable comfort. We have to realize that the immense chaos we are seeing right now is actually a profound mercy. The illusion of the peaceful, prosperous, secular world order was the most dangerous trap ever laid for the ummah. It put millions of believers to sleep. We became comfortable. We became complacent. We started loving the matrix. The sheer unprecedented brutality of the 1v80 coalition is the violent alarm clock that the ummah desperately needed. It is the shattering of the illusion. The mask is completely off. The global institutions have revealed themselves to be nothing more than the hypocritical enforcement arm of the Dajjal system. You can no longer pretend that the secular world has your best interests at heart. The gray area has been entirely violently eliminated. The sides have been clearly drawn. You are either with the 80 flags of the simulation or you are with the one flag of absolute reality. This clarity is a massive gift. It forces you to make a definitive choice. It forces you to actually examine your own yaqeen. Are you a Muslim just because it is your cultural background? Or are you a Muslim because you are genuinely prepared to hold the burning coal when the entire planet turns against you? The furnace is incredibly hot right now, but the fire is purifying. It is burning away the hypocrisy, the cowardice, and the love of the dunya, leaving only the absolute, unadulterated truth. Embrace the clarity. The sorting process is almost complete. You must anchor your psychology to the inevitability of the divine promise. The secular mind looks at the current geopolitical board and sees a terrifying, unbeatable monopoly of power. But the believer looks at the exact same board and sees the final, desperate flailing of an arrogant empire right before its divine collapse. Allah does not break His promises. The Prophet ﷺ promised us that this matter, this religion, will reach everywhere that the night and the day reach. He promised us that the system of deception will eventually be utterly destroyed. The ultimate victory of the believers is not a hopeful possibility. It is a mathematical, absolute certainty written into the core physics of the universe before the stars are even formed. The overlords are fighting a war that they have already mathematically lost. Their AI cannot save them. Their nuclear arsenals cannot save them. Their media monopolies cannot save them. They are marching their entire civilization straight into the crushing reality of the divine decree. Your job is not to panic. Your job is not to save the entire world by yourself. Your job is simply to ensure that you are standing on the right side of the line, holding the source code when the simulation finally ends. Look at the chaos with the cold, calm certainty of a victor who has already read the final chapter of the book. The matrix is glitching. The overlords are terrified. The dawn is mathematically inevitable. So this is the final reality check. The user who wrote that comment saw past the noise, and now you have to do the exact same thing. The dunya hardcore survival world is reaching its final, most intense, most unforgiving stages. The 1v80 is no longer a historical concept. It is the daily headline on your feed. The top-ranked overlords are terrified, and they are using every weapon in their massive arsenal to keep you distracted, divided, and paralyzed by fear. You have to make a choice today. You can continue to play the role of the NPC, consuming their media, grinding in their corporate matrix, and desperately seeking the validation of a system that absolutely hates you. You can stay asleep in the golden cage until the angel of death wakes you up. Or you can embrace the profound, terrifying honor of the awakening. You can unplug your mind from their psychological operations. You can rebuild your physical body, purify your income, and completely sever the love of the dunya from your heart. You can seek out the other strangers, rebuild the physical jama'ah, and align yourself entirely with Ta'if al-Mansura. The choice is binary. The simulation does not allow for a middle ground anymore. The architecture of the final deception is real, the trap is set, and the enemies are allied against the truth. But the Quran is the ultimate Easter egg from the dev, and it contains the exact instructions you need to exit the matrix. The meta is broken. The illusion is shattered. The ultimate victory is getting into the paradise server. Wake up